Pranaya karunya navanakyam Satya karyana
Es agradable. Las características corporales hermosas que automáticamente atraen a la vista se llaman ruchira, que significa agradables.
Y están llenos de compasión por todas las almas caídas.
Hare Krishna Krishna
Sai Charanaravinda Bhakti Deva.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 12, Text 15. Adhokshajam,
Adhokshayam,
Bhutai,
Bhutai,
Svadamabi,
Svadamami,
Pasye,
Pasye,
Aprabhistam,
Aprabhistam,
Pravishtavat,
Pravishtavat,
Svadhamabhi,
Svadhamabhi,
junto con todo lo relacionado con su señoría.
junto con todo lo relacionado con su señoría.
Kashyet,
Pasye,
se debe ver
se debe ver
la comprensión del carácter omnipresente de la Suprema Personalidad de Dios es la comprensión perfecta de la verdad absoluta que puede alcanzarse por medio del estudio de las escrituras védicas. Conoce a Krishna, pero ha tenido la fortuna de estar un tiempo, más de un año, y luego otra vez unos meses con Srila Prabhupada directamente. Se unió al movimiento de la conciencia de Krishna en el 22 de abril de 1971 en Filadelfia, en Estados Unidos. Tener un brahmana en el templo ya era algo especial.
So at that time things were started expanding exponentially really, and the movement still was not so big at that time, but it was really, these were the years of great expansion in the 1970s, early 1970s.
No había todavía muchos devotos, pero eran los primeros años de los 70, cuando todo estaba creciendo muy rápidamente.
So I had my first opportunity to see Srila Prabhupada 3 months after joining the movement. It took all of 3 months, and that was to go to New York, Brooklyn Temple to take initiation.
Yo tuve la primera oportunidad de ver a Srila Prabhupada 3 meses más tarde. Fuimos al Templo de Brooklyn en Nueva York y ahí para tomar la iniciación. Nunca le he visto llegar a un aeropuerto, porque luego ya de sirviente siempre estuve con él llegando, y la primera vez pues estuve en el templo haciendo otra cosa y tampoco fue agradable.
There were devotees coming from all over Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and Detroit Temple, Chicago. They all converged in New York. So I met some other devotees and they invited me to their van for pizza prashada.
Entonces lo que me impidió ver a Prabhupada era que los devotos vinieron de todos los sitios, de todos los diferentes templos, Baltimore, Chicago, otras ciudades, y algunos de ellos me invitaron a su furgoneta a tomar pizza.
July here, we were very hot, very humid, maybe even worse than that. So it was very hot time of year. Every day was Fahrenheit. It was in the 90s every day, very hot.
Entonces, en julio en Nueva York es parecido a esto, ¿no? Está frente del mar, muy húmedo, mucho calor, 35 grados por ahí.
And the temple room in Brooklyn, Henry Street, you know the size of that temple. So the temple room was maybe twice as long and not much wider than this, and it was packed with, how many? With hundreds of devotees. Hundreds of devotees were packed into the temple room.
El edificio en Henry Street, yo estuve ahí una vez, es como muy estrecho, donde el templo tal vez es el doble de eso. Imagínate ahí cientos de devotos prácticamente, todos dentro de esa sala de templo en julio.
So I was, at that time I was Kirtanananda, I guess Kirtanananda's assistant, his servant at that time. So because I was very fortunate because I got to be right by Prabhupada's Vyasa-san.
Entonces, porque yo estuve allí como el asistente, el sirviente de Kirtanananda, pues tenía la fortuna, como él, claro, estaba muy cerca, yo estuve a su lado, ahí a los pies de Prabhupada.
And much like you'll hear from so many of my godbrothers and godsisters, when you first saw Srila Prabhupada there were so much emotion, so many things would go on simultaneously. There was so much. All was there, and of course, as many say, when you saw Prabhupada, he was 5'5". Prabhupada was not very tall, but that wasn't what you noticed. You always saw Prabhupada's glow, Prabhupada's effulgence. That's a start.
So, como probablemente muchos de mis hermanos y hermanas espirituales ya también lo expresan. La primera vez que hemos visto a Prabhupada, aunque él era pequeño, no era muy alto, pero lo que se notaba era esa refulgencia, ¿no? que emanaba de él.
And Prabhupada's complexion was very golden. It was completely golden. And like I say, his effulgence was there, but more than that was the center of focus was Prabhupada's eyes. You always would see Prabhupada's eyes, which you see his eyes here, but it doesn't allow you to see what Prabhupada's eyes would look like, because they just look full of love and compassion.
Era esa refulgencia dorada, y lo más que destacaba eran sus ojos, que eran llenos de amor y compasión.
He exhibited so many things simultaneously. The one thing that amazed me with Prabhupada was very regal in how he did everything. The way he walked, all the movements that he made, he looked so royal, aristocratic. But at the same time, he exhibited humility, such humility. So these things, in some sense, you would think were contradictory, but Prabhupada exhibited all these qualities at the same time.
Esas cualidades era que Prabhupada, todos sus movimientos, su manera de comportarse, de ser, era muy aristocrático, ¿no? Real, tipo real se dice, como de un rey, pero simultáneamente muy humilde, o sea, algo que es contradictorio, pero en Prabhupada era simultáneamente presente.
Just gaze at Prabhupada.
Pero como era la primera vez que vi a Prabhupada, pues yo recité las oraciones muy rápidamente para levantarme otra vez y ver a Prabhupada.
So when I sat up to again look at Prabhupada, I had this devotee who was still offering obeisances behind me. So I sat up and I accidentally sat on his head.
Como yo me levanté muy rápido, pues tenía un devoto detrás y él todavía estaba agachar y me senté encima de la cabeza.
So he became a little bit perturbed.
Se,
So I sat on his head.
se molestó un poco, como me sentí encima de la cabeza.
So he lifted his head with great force.
Entonces, levantó la cabeza con fuerza.
And when he did, I was forced forward and I literally fell right on the Prabhupada's lap. Fell right
Como él me empujó, yo, como tan cerca, pues entonces me puse encima del regazo de Prabhupada.
So that was my first meeting with Prabhupada.
El primer encuentro con Srila Prabhupada.
And he just looked at me, and I was down, and I looked up, and he said, "What is the difficulty?"
Entonces me miró y yo miré así para decir, ¿cuál es el problema?
And I just sunk back. I didn't say speeches. I just sunk back and sat down and very quietly and didn't move. And that was the end of the conversation.
No dije nada y me puse para atrás y me senté. Y eso era el final de la conversación. Kushakrata, ese devoto, hace poco que dejó el cuerpo, era brahmachari toda la vida. Él repitió las reglas y eso, no intoxicación, no comer carne, no juegos de azar, y ya no sabía, se quedó así. Prabhupada empezó a reírse y al final pues no es sexo ilícito. Y él era brahmachari el resto de su vida. O sea, era difícil estar delante de Prabhupada y no, mejor no.
So then that day I was initiated, so then my name was called, we're all Bhaktas, Bhaktavin, it's called up. So I went up and offered our obeisance. You always had to remember to offer your obeisances on this side, which side. So I offered my obeisances and I stood there before him. So he said, what are the regulative principles? And I spoke all of the regulative principles.
Entonces, cada uno fue llamado, había que acercarse y ofrecer las reverencias, pues me llamaron los todavía Bhaktas, y repitió, dijo los principios regulativos.
So then he said to me, he said, you're chanting 16 rounds?
El Prabhupada preguntó, ¿tú cantas 16 rondas?
And I said, I'm chanting 20 rounds a day, Prabhupada.
Yo canto 20 rondas al día.
And he just looked at me and went,
Solamente me miró así.
He was not impressed.
No se dejó impresionar. En el otro peldaño, o sea, debajo, hablando y observando, porque estaba la puerta abierta, se Prabhupada paseando, cantando japa, y a ver si le podíamos ver. Y sí, él pasó de ahí para ir a otra habitación.
So as he walked by, he saw us, young boys, these teenagers down at the bottom of the stairs, just looking up, smiling. And he said, come on.
Cuando nos vio, ahí abajo, dos jovencitos, mirando ahí arriba, ¿no? Venga, a venir.
So we both went up the stairs, and Prabhupada, we went into the room with Prabhupada. And his breakfast plate had just been brought into the room, which would always be against the wall, and his seat would be, he would face the wall to take prasadam.
Cuando entramos, le habían llevado el plato con el desayuno y estaba contra la pared. O sea, Prabhupada siempre tuvo el prasadam contra la pared y se sentó delante para comer.
So he went and he sat down and gave me a piece, and gave Kaladi a piece, and said, okay, now you can go.
Dio a cada uno un trocito del prasadam, ahora podéis iros.
This was something Prabhupada did very often when people were in his room, when he brought his prasadam. Prabhupada always took prasadam alone for the most part, and always honored Krishna prasadam so nicely, the way he ate prasadam. So it was what he would do, he would always give everybody. However many people he would give, and he'd say, okay, now you can go. And he would take prasadam alone, no talking, no anything.
Prabhupada siempre solía tomar prasadam solo, realmente honrarlo. Pero cuando había personas, pues a todos dio algo, ahora podéis iros, y luego tomó solo, siempre tomando solo sin hablar, sin...
Urinated on the fire sacrifice because I was convinced that Prabhupada was really going to laugh when he heard that.
Entonces la historia que escogió era el del gorila Dvivida, que causó un caos, un desastre por todas partes donde iba. Y una de las partes es cuando llega un sacrificio, donde se celebra un sacrificio con fuego, etc. Y ese gorila, pues, orinaba encima para apagar fuego. Y él pensaba, cuando llegamos a ese punto y cuento esto, pues, va a reírse como una...
So now there's 6, 8 of us in there, and I'm reading along, and I'm actually, you know, becoming my heart's beating. And then I said it, the gorilla urinated.
Ahí estuvimos 6, 8 devotos, yo leyendo y ya con la esperanza, ahora llega el punto donde no, el gorila orina y ya, lo digo y a ver.
As soon as I said it, Prabhupada and laughing and laughing and laughing, all went into ecstasy. And he kept slapping his knees, laughing. So it was beyond all my expectations. It was so kind.
Entonces esa reacción de Prabhupada, ¿no? Cuando se rió tanto, era más allá de todas sus expectativas, todo el mundo en éxtasis.
He said, I like the stories about Krishna and Balaram killing the demons. Very much.
Me gustaban mucho esas historias cuando Krishna y Balaram matan a los demonios.
So then we settled down and I finished reading the story.
Terminamos la historia.
So the next day I went in and I forgot to pick a story. I was going to pick a story every day about the demons.
El día siguiente había olvidado escoger una de las historias.
So as soon as we went and sat down, Prabhupada looked at me and said, okay.
Nada más sentarse me dio la señal para empezar.
I said, I don't know. And I started going through the pages.
Entonces yo ya estaba buscando a ver dónde leer.
Wanted to find the right story.
Quería encontrar una historia adecuada.
And Prabhupada said, read from anywhere. He said, Krishna is like a sweet ball. Wherever you bite is sweet.
No importa, empieza a leer donde quieras. ¿No? Krishna es como una bolita dulce, tú la muerdes, no importa qué lado, siempre es dulce.
No distinction. Every story was sweet. So I've just found the next story and I began reading.
No importa qué historia, todas son dulces y entonces empezó cualquier historia que tenía ahí para leerla.
So that was where I was getting to do my service. I was becoming very attached to doing these things.
Cuando decía ese tipo de servicio desarrollé un apego. En ese templo que no era mucho más grande, tal vez un poco más largo que este, había cientos de devotos, todos de la Murari y de todas partes.
So then he started to speak, and these were the words he said: Parama Karuna Pahudwijana.
Y empezó a hablar y dijo esas palabras.
And he quoted Lord Chandas, these two lords. Prabhupada said these two lords, they're very, very merciful.
Esos dos señores son muy, muy misericordiosos.
He said, and they're distributing this chanting of Hare Krishna freely. Freely they're distributing love of God.
Y ellos distribuyen ese canto de Hare Krishna libremente, amor por Dios.
He said, Krishna, he is also very merciful, but he requires that you surrender.
Krishna también es misericordioso, pero él exige que uno se rinde.
He said, but Sri Sri Gurnitai, Nitai Gaurachandra, he said, they don't even require that you surrender. Simply chant Hare Krishna.
Pero Gaurnitai, ellos ni siquiera exigen que uno se rinde, simplemente que se cante Hare Krishna.
And as he was speaking, each sentence, he was becoming more overwhelmed and more emotional. So his words were coming out very slowly.
Y hablando, pues otra vez se emocionó mucho y las palabras salieron muy lentamente.
And his eyes at this time, they just filled up with tears that were actually coming out of his eyes.
Y lágrimas salieron de sus ojos.
And after 3 sentences, that was the end of his lecture. He just stopped and he became ecstatic.
Y después de 3 frases, pues paró, porque entró en éxtasis,
And he just closed his eyes.
cerró los ojos.
So this was something that happened very rarely. Prabhupada would exhibit such symptoms of such ecstasy.
Esto eran cosas que pocas veces pasaron, que Prabhupada mostró esos síntomas de éxtasis.
I mean, I don't know all that Prabhupada was thinking, but I could see as we were traveling how he was just so overwhelmed with Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda and what was going on in the world. And of course he was the instrument who was doing this.
Viajando con él podía ver como él estaba lleno de ese sentimiento sobre Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, como en todo el mundo estaba pasando esto y él era el instrumento que lo causó. Para la comida, porque se quedaron todo el día fuera en el bosque.
And so I'm just massaging him. This is when he's just lying there in this ecstatic moment, and I'm just continuing massaging. And then he said, in Mother Jasoda, she would make very nice prashadam, puris, halava, kachuri, lagdu, put in his tiffin.
Y yo masajeando, sonriendo, hablando que la Madre Yashoda prepara un prasadam exquisito, con puris, halava, lagdu, what else? Whatever, kachori, so many things, tantas cosas que pone en el paquete.
Yes. And the other cowherd boys, they didn't have such opulent food. They would get rice, dal, chapatis, and put in their tiffin.
Y los otros pastorcillos de vacas pues no tenían un prasadam tan opulento, pues ellos tenían arroz, dal, chapatis en su paquete.
And I'm never saying that, I don't say one word, I'm just listening, massaging and listening.
Yo no digo nada, sino ahí masajeando.
And then he just continued and he said, so when they would go, and then of course they would play, young boys play, and then they would start, they would take Krishna's lunch away, they would take his tiffin because they knew he had nice, so they would take it and they would play keep away with Krishna's lunch and keep it away from him.
Cuando pues ahí jugando le quitaron el paquete del prasadam a Krishna, sabiendo que ahí hay cosas dentro que son mejores, y pasando de uno al otro para que él no podía tenerlo. Escondiendo.
And then finally they would open his tiffin and they would give Krishna their tiffin so that he had to eat rice, chapatis and dal.
Pero finalmente abrieron su paquete y le dieron a él los suyos, que solamente tenían arroz, chapati y dal.
And they would eat his kachuri and lagdu and puris and halava, and they would eat all of his, what Mother Jasoda had made.
Y ellos comieron todo lo que había hecho Madre Yashoda, el halava, el lagdu, puris, etc.
And looking at me, say, I just want to go back to the spiritual world and eat kachuri and lagdu with Krishna.
Y dijo que solamente quisiera volver al mundo espiritual y comer lagdu y kachuris con Krishna.
So see, this is what Krishna consciousness is. And this is the purpose of all this philosophy, all this hard work, is to go back to the spiritual world. Ese
es el propósito de todo lo que se está haciendo, que volver al mundo espiritual y comer cachuris. Pues si se sigue estrictamente las reglas, los principios, pues vendrá el día que se reconocerá que esa asociación ISKCON ha salvado la civilización.
So then he began to speak about his own childhood, because again, he was at the Gurukula and there were so many children.
Y entonces habló de su propia infancia, porque estuvimos ahí en el Gurukul donde había muchos niños.
And he said, when I was a young boy, he said, I had 2 teachers.
Dijo, cuando yo era pequeño, tuve 2 maestros.
2 tutors, who would come to his house, 2 tutors, same thing. He said, one for Mridanga and one for ABCs.
Uno vinieron a casa a enseñar, uno para enseñarle la midanga y el otro el abecedario.
He said, my father, of course, he hired the tutor to teach me Mridanga.
Mi padre, él había contratado al maestro para enseñarme la midanga.
And of course, my mother hired the tutor for material purposes.
Y mi madre contrató al maestro para enseñarme cosas pues, materiales.
He said, my father never wanted anything other than for me to become a Vaishnava.
Dijo que mi padre nunca tuvo otro deseo para mí que me volviera un Vaishnava.
He said, whenever anyone came to the house, any sadhu, swami come to the house, he would always say, please, you make my son a servant of Radharani. That was his only prayer, that he become a servant of Radharani.
Pues cada vez que a casa visitó un sadhu, pues el padre le pidió, por favor, haz que mi hijo se vuelva un sirviente de Radharani.
And he praised his father very much. He said he was a very great devotee, and he said all he wanted was for me to be a devotee. And he said, therefore I have dedicated my Krishna book to him.
Y alabó a su padre diciendo, él solamente tenía ese deseo, que yo me vuelva un devoto. Y por lo tanto también dedicó el libro de Krishna a su padre.
He said, my mother, she would become upset because the teacher from Mridanga would be giving me classes, and the other teacher would be sitting in the waiting room in order to instruct me, and she would become upset because she wanted me to learn all these things.
La madre se enfadó porque ahí estuvimos con el maestro de Midanga y el otro maestro del abecedario esperando en la sala.
And then he laughed and he said, maybe my father knew someday I would become a very big Mridanga player.
Tal vez mi padre sabía que algún día me volveré un gran tocador de Midanga.
So then Prabhupada left Dallas and went to New York, and then he stopped in London.
Govinda tomó la decisión, pues hay que entrar y preguntar a Prabhupada, pues a ver.
So I followed him in.
Le seguí entrar.
Prabhupada was sitting behind his desk very comfortably. I mean, it was all this was done. He was just chanting, enjoying being in Mayapur.
Y Prabhupada sentado detrás de su escritorio, relajado, disfrutando de estar en Mayapur.
Brahmananda started to speak.
Y Brahmananda empezó a hablar.
And he said, so Prabhupada, you know when you're in the temple room like that and you're giving class, and you went into ecstasy.
Y dijo, pues Prabhupada, entonces estás así en el templo, dando la clase y entras en éxtasis.
And Prabhupada is looking at him. What are you talking about?
Mirándole, ¿qué está diciendo?
And then he said, when you do that, he said, what should we do?
Y Prabhupada preguntó, ¿y si eso pasa, entonces nosotros qué tenemos que hacer?
And Prabhupada looked at him with this wonderful, humble face that he would have, and he said, I don't do that very often.
Mirándole así con humildad, diciendo, no lo hago muchas veces.
And he said, yes, Prabhupada, I know, but when you do it, what should we do? Should we just sit there quietly, or should we chant?
Y dijo, vale, pero a veces pasa, y cuando pasa, ¿qué tenemos que hacer? ¿Está ahí sentados, quietos o cantar?
And Prabhupada said, yes, you can chant.
Igual puedes cantar.
Prabhupada would never say you shouldn't chant. You should always chant.
Jamás diría que no hay que cantar, ¿no? Siempre hay que cantar.
Every moment we should chant, Prabhupada would say, so anytime we can chant.
Cada momento hay que cantar, pues.
So it was a kind of a silly question.
Sí, fue una pregunta tonta.
But Prabhupada's mood was so wonderful because he used to do these things very often, and he didn't do it very often.
Pero su humor era muy bonito. Bueno, no lo hago muchas veces y la verdad es que no lo hizo muchas veces.
But when he did it, it was very memorable.
Pero cuando pasó,
Very
pues,
wonderful.
era algo para recordar. Cosa maravillosa.
Difficult because it just transported the airport literally and became Vaikuntha when Prabhupada came to the airport.
Ahí no había estado durante algunos meses, en donde describía lo que pasa en un aeropuerto, o pasó en un aeropuerto cuando Prabhupada llegó, no se puede casi describir, es como todo el aeropuerto se transforma en Vaikuntha.
1-2 hours before the plane arrived, and they would just be having kirtan, hundreds of devotees having these kirtans, and they're just waiting to see Prabhupada.
Hay que imaginarse, pues hay cientos de devotos en esos tiempos todavía uno pudo acercarse a donde llega, ¿no? A la llegada. Y a lo mejor 1 o 2 horas antes ya estaban ahí haciendo kirtan y esperando que Prabhupada aparezca y pues todo sé que es...
Now again, I was at the airport with Prabhupada dozens and dozens of times, but I was always with him. I never was waiting for Prabhupada to come into any city. I never had that experience. I was always right behind Prabhupada as he was going through the corridor there.
Pues habíamos ya muchas veces con Prabhupada en el aeropuerto, pero siempre como si oriente detrás de él, nunca en esa otra situación esperándole con mucho deseo.
And Prabhupada was so wonderful because when you were in the plane with Prabhupada, whenever that light would go on, fasten your seatbelt, Prabhupada would get up and go to the bathroom.
Normalmente cuando estuvimos con Prabhupada en el avión, en el momento que se aparece ese señal, la señal, ¿no? A ponerse el cinturón, Prabhupada se levanta y va al baño.
For him it meant ready to get ready for everyone to see him. So he would get in and he would get himself ready and he would put on tilak. And I would have to walk to the bathroom with him because he didn't go by himself. So now
it's before landing, right?
Yeah, before landing, just as you're getting ready to land. So no one was allowed to get up. He would get up and then I would have to go with him to the bathroom. And then the steward, everybody would look at me and say, you have to sit down. And I just go just tell him. That was always my response. And then no one would say anything to Prabhupada.
La razón es porque era antes de aterrizar, pues había que ponerse el cinturón. Pero Prabhupada se levantó para ponerse el tilak, para prepararse para la llegada. Y como él va, pues yo detrás, porque era el servicio, todo el mundo, ¿no? Ya dicen, hay que sentarse. ¿Qué puedo hacer? Díselo a él. Nunca nadie dijo nada a Prabhupada.
The place, you would have half a dozen beautiful garlands around.
Pues cuando entonces era el momento de salir del avión, dijo, pues coge las guirnaldas, porque a irse, le pusieron pues a lo mejor una media docena de guirnaldas, ¿no?
You don't see garlands like this anymore, do you? They would be just gardenias, 100 gardenia flowers, red roses. It smelled very good at that time, not like they do now in those places.
Esas guirnaldas hoy en día ya no se ven. Cientos de gardenias o rosas rojas que tenían una fragancia y pues hoy en día.
Big magnolia flowers, sometimes they would pick these big magnolias, and Prabhupada would just put one on after another. You'd see them stacked up.
Una tras otra, ¿no? Con magnolias grandes hasta aquí.
So then when the plane would land, he'd say, get the garland, so I'd bring down the garland.
Pues cuando entonces el avión aterrizó, dice, coge las guirnaldas, pues yo cojo todas las guirnaldas ahí.
And he would go, give me this one.
Y dice, pues dame esa.
So then I put the one garland around him, and then he'd say, now distribute the other. So he would have us all looking very nice, Vaishnavas.
Entonces, pues una escogió y los otros para cada uno que se lo pusieron ellos, y así todo el mundo tiene un aspecto muy hermoso de Vaishnava.
So now you can imagine when the devotees see the plane landing from the other side, now the kirtan is really starting, you could hear it from the plane, 5, 10 mridangas, 20 pair of cartels, and it's going crazy.
Entonces cuando realmente el avión ya aterriza, los devotos sabiéndolo, pues el kirtan aumenta, ¿no? Ven 5 mirangas, 20 cartas, pues un kirtan tremendo.
And hundreds of devotees.
Cientos de devotos.
And Prabhupada he was not taking first class, so he was not coming out soon. He was like, there would be sometimes 50, 100 people out before him.
Pues como Prabhupada no viajaba en primera clase, pues estaba ahí en el pasillo esperando a lo mejor 50, 100 personas antes para salir.
So as everyone's eyes are just fixed on that doorway, every person that comes out, they're just
y todo el mundo fijándose en la puerta a ver quién sale, ¿no? Uno tras otro saliendo a ver.
And Prabhupada, because he had his own gait, his own walk, so usually there was some space in between. So every time there was a space, they were hoping Prabhupada would be the next person.
Prabhupada tenía su manera de andar, pues cada vez que había un espacio, todo el mundo esperando que ahora Prabhupada quién viene.
So then, finally, that moment would come when Prabhupada with beautiful garland and his effulgence and big smile because he's seeing all of his disciples and everyone is so ecstatic to see him. So then he would reach that point.
Finalmente Prabhupada aparece ahí con todas las guirnaldas puestas, una gran sonrisa porque muy contento de ver a tantos discípulos.
So then as soon as they saw him, then there were so many reactions, so many people would just fall. This is in the airport, of course, everything else is going on still, but the devotees are in their own world.
Tantas reacciones diferentes en el momento que aparece. Algunos simplemente se lanzan al suelo, por ejemplo.
So some devotees would fall down, the people doing kirtan, they would continue with the kirtan. People would be laughing, people would be crying.
Algunos en el suelo, algunos siguiendo con la viranga, algunos riéndose, otros llorando.
Yeah, Prabhupada just have his cane and just be walking very nicely.
Prabhupada con su bastón simplemente andando.
Gliding, right? Prabhupada glided as he walked, just gliding.
Deslizándose.
So the point of the story was, while all this is going on, and I'm right behind Prabhupada.
Entonces, la historia que quería contar, entonces, todo eso estaba pasando y yo directamente detrás de Prabhupada.
And I could see all the devotees, and I could see their ecstasy.
Y yo pude ver a todos los devotos y ver sus éxtasis.
But I didn't feel it.
Pero yo no lo sentí.
So I was not only sad, I was becoming depressed. Everyone's in ecstasy except me.
No solamente me sentí triste, sino deprimido, porque todo el mundo en éxtasis menos yo.
So now I'm with Prabhupada.
No estoy con Prabhupada.
So then we go back to the temple, and Prabhupada's in his Mercedes, I'm right beside him, I have all the bags, everything, and he gets back to the temple and goes up the stairs.
Entonces estamos en el coche, en el Mercedes, y yo al lado de Prabhupada con todos los equipajes, y luego pues se va a la habitación.
So immediately I have so many things to do now. I've unpacked his bag, set up his desk. It's late morning.
Hay que hacer muchas cosas, es ya un poco tarde en la mañana, hay que preparar, sacar las cosas de las maletas, preparar el escritorio.
So I don't have time to think, I'm just getting everything ready.
Y no hay tiempo para pensar nada, solamente tengo que prepararlo todo.
So I had to get out the cooker, cut up those vegetables, make the chapati dough, and get ready for massage because it's already almost noontime.
Como casi es mediodía, pues como de antes que se escribió, hay que poner la olla esa de 3 niveles, hay que preparar los vegetales, la masa de chapati y el masaje antes del mediodía.
So then I do all that and they go into the room and say, "You ready for massage, Prabhupada?"
Todo ya preparado, pues me voy a la habitación preguntando, ¿ya está listo para el masaje, Prabhupada?
I'm still very unhappy.
Y todavía me siento infeliz.
So we went into the next room where Prabhupada would take his massage under this skylight, the hole in the where the sun would come through.
Luego vamos a la habitación al lado donde hay
Claraboya.
una
Claraboya.
claraboya para dar el masaje.
So now I start massaging Prabhupada, massaging his head,
Dando masaje en la
sandalwood
cabeza.
oil.
Yo estaba tan ocupado que ya no pensaba en nada y solamente haciendo mi servicio.
So then around an hour later, the bell rang.
Y una hora más tarde de repente suena la campana.
I went into Prabhupada's room.
Voy a la habitación de Prabhupada ofreciendo reverencias
And then I sat up
y me senté
and he looked at me.
y me miró.
He said, "Do you like your service?"
Me preguntó, ¿te gusta tu servicio?
I said, "Yes, Prabhupada."
Claro que sí.
He said, "That is love."
Y dije, eso es amor.
He said, "Service is love."
El servicio es amor.
He says, "All this jumping up and down and dancing and singing." He said, "That doesn't mean anything."
Y dijo, todo ese saltar y bailar y cantar, eso no
He
significa
said,
nada.
"Anyone can do that."
Cualquiera puede hacer eso.
He said, "But to do service is love."
Pero ofrecer servicio, eso es amor.
He said, "So you just continue to do your service." He said, "Everything will be all right."
Tú sigue haciendo tu servicio y todo se arreglará.
I said, "Is that okay?"
¿Vale?
Yes, Prabhupada. So that's what the devotees to be engaged in service, and that's the sign of love. We can make, not that they were making a show, they all have great love for Prabhupada, but he was comforting me in the knowledge that you just stick to doing your service and everything else is all right. Because that's what I said they have such love for you. That's what I said at the time during the massage. I said, all my God brothers and God sisters have such love for you. I said, but I'm not feeling that. And I said, they're all dancing, singing so many things. So that's what he said. He said, they may be jumping up and down. He said, but you're doing something.
El síntoma de amor es hacer, o sea, prestar servicio. Lo que dijo él entonces era que yo veo que mis amados hermanos espirituales tienen tanto amor por ti, ahí cantando, bailando, y su punto era, pues sí, eso cualquiera puede hacer, pero el síntoma es que tú estás haciendo algo por mí, ¿no?
So Maya is so strong. Even you're right there with the pure devotee, spiritual master, still you can be in Maya.
Maya es tan fuerte que uno puede estar al lado, ¿no?, del devoto puro, del maestro espiritual, y aún así uno está en Maya.
But that was so many devotees like that story because everybody can relate to that at different times.
Pero los devotos pues les gusta esa historia porque todo el mundo se puede identificar, ¿no?, de algún tiempo. Atrás, en los años 70, no hubo tantas reglas y regulaciones en ISKCON.
And we were just starting to find out about things like Chaturmasya.
Y ahí se empezó uno darse cuenta de cosas como, por ejemplo, Chaturmasya.
One could do so much more than fasting from green vegetables 1 month and milk 1 month and yogurt 1 month. There were so many rules and regulations.
Aparte de esas reglas sencillas, de no tomar durante un mes leche o yogur o vegetales verdes, verduras, pues hay muchas más reglas y regulaciones.
So when the devotee was asking Prabhupada about all these different rules and regulations, he was getting letters.
El devoto también se recibían cartas preguntando acerca de esas reglas y regulaciones.
And he said, my disciples, he said, they can't even chant 16 rounds and follow the regulative principles, and they're worried about so many rules and regulations.
Y dijo, mis discípulos ni siquiera son capaces de cantar 16 rondas y seguir los 4 principios regulativos, pero se quieren saber de tantas otras reglas y regulaciones.
So he said it was better to become very expert in following these rules and regulations.
Y dijo que sería mejor volverse experto en seguir esas reglas y regulaciones.
And then in, this was 1973, in March, Prabhupada went to Mayapur.
Y en el 73, Prabhupada fue a Mayapur,
And some of his disciples there, some of the sannyasis, they were following Chaturmasya.
y ahí algunos de sus discípulos, unos sannyasis, estaban siguiendo Chaturmasya.
Because when you go to Mayapur, Navadvip, there's so many Gaudiya Math facilities, and they would all, in particular, they were following, they were not shaving, so they, when Prabhupada came to Mayapur, they all had beards.
Entonces, ahí hay muchos otros templos y una de las reglas es que uno no se afeita. So, cuando llegó Prabhupada a Mayapur, esos años ya tuvieran barbas.
Then immediately Prabhupada became upset. He said, hippies.
Enseguida Prabhupada se enfadó y dijo, hippies.
And he told them all to shave it off.
Dijo a todos que se afeitasen.
Especially at that time, in the 70s, people in the West were very inclined to grow long hair and beards.
Especialmente en esa época, en los 70, la gente en el occidente tenía esa propensión de dejarse pelo largo y barba.
And Prabhupada, he liked very clean, nice, short, if any hair, short hair and shaved.
Y Prabhupada le gustó que si hubo algo de pelo que sea muy corto o afeitado y también la cara afeitada.
So he said it's just an excuse to grow hair.
Porque era solamente una excusa de dejarse el pelo largo.
So I've already have requests for so many stories from earlier times. We have stories about monkeys, and also one devotee has asked that I tell some of these childhood activities of Prabhupada that he told me during evening massages. So I thought I would start out with that because they're really very wonderful.
So, hubo algunas peticiones de hablar, por ejemplo, esa historia de los monos, y también otro devoto pidió que se contasen historias de su infancia que él contó durante esos masajes por la noche. Y voy a empezar ahí porque son historias muy maravillosas.
And these stories, of course, go to evening massage.
Entonces, durante el masaje por la noche.
And of course you shake and all the rice falls, or all the sand falls through and all the rice remains inside.
Cuando uno lo mueve el colador, la arena se va para abajo y el arroz se queda dentro del colador. Entonces,
No, it just, because it's all very dry, and you just shake and it all just falls
no es
off.
que el arroz no se queda con ningún arroz, o sea, esto es tan seco que se va el arroz, la arena se queda el arroz.
It's not like the sand you have here at this beach.
No es como la arena que tenemos en la
It's
playa.
very nice, very nice sand. So then he continued, he said, my mother, she was first class cook.
Y continuó diciendo, mi madre era una cocinera de primera clase.
He said, and my sister, she could also cook very nicely.
Y mi hermana también sabía cocinar muy bien.
And he said, and I also can cook very nicely.
También yo sé cocinar muy bien.
He said, I learned how to cook just by watching my mother.
Y yo aprendí cocinar simplemente observando a mi madre.
Not that he ever cooked, but he just by watching, he said, I would watch her and I learned how to cook.
No que ahí estaba cocinando, sino solamente observando aprendió.
And then he just continued on. He was just, as I said, in this meditation, he was just there.
Así continuó, ahí como en una meditación, estando ahí.
And he said that was Vedic culture.
Eso era la cultura védica.
He said all women were expert cooks.
Todas las mujeres eran cocineras expertas.
He said, and then when they would have a big festival, all the different ladies in the village, they would all cook one preparation and they would have a big festival.
Y cuando hay un festival, una fiesta en el pueblo, pues todas las mujeres, cada una preparación y luego se juntan todas.
And he said, sometimes my mother, at night I would tell her I want puris.
Y a veces a mi madre le dije que por la noche quise puris.
He said, because when I was young, I only ate puris, never chapatis.
Cuando era joven solamente comí puris, nunca chapatis.
He said, I didn't like chapati.
No me gustaban los chapatis.
I had to have puris.
Tenía que tener puris.
So sometimes late at night, I would tell my mother, me some puris.
Y a veces por la noche dije a mi madre, hazme algunos puris.
And she would say, oh, it's too late for puri.
Y ella solía decir, eso es demasiado tarde para puris.
And he said, I would insist, I want puris.
Y insistiendo, yo quiero puris.
And his mother again would say, no, I make you something else, but not good to have puris now.
Pero la madre dijo, no, yo te hago otra cosa, ahora no es bueno tomar puris.
And then my father would say, if he wants puris, make him puris.
Entonces el padre intervino diciendo, si quiere puris él, pues hazle puris.
And he smiled, he said, perhaps my father knew.
Sonriendo, Prabhupada dijo, tal vez mi padre supo.
So and that's all he said. He didn't say what he knew. He said, but perhaps my father knew.
No dijo lo que él sabía tal vez, sino él sabía.
So then he continued on. Now he's only just 4 or 5 years old at this time.
Ahí
Knew.
no dijo lo que él sabía tal vez, sino él sabía.
So then he continued on. Now he's only just 4 or 5 years old at this time.
Ahí solamente tuvo 4 o 5 años y siguió escribiendo.
Once someone asked Prabhupada how far back he could remember in his childhood.
Y una vez alguien le preguntó hasta dónde se podía recordar de su infancia.
And he said he remembers being on his mother's lap, maybe 6 months old.
Y dijo que se acordaba estando en el regazo de su madre, tal vez tenía 6 meses.
So he could remember back very far.
Se pudo recordar muy para atrás.
So then he said, when I was young I had many toys.
Dijo, cuando era joven tuve muchos juguetes.
So one of my favorite toys, it was a cow.
Una de mis juguetes favoritas era una vaca.
He said, and the cow had a little, a little line attached to it with a little ball on the end that you would squeeze and the cow would jump like that.
La vaca tenía una cuerda con una bolita al final y cuando uno aprieta la cuerda, pues la vaca saltaba. Sophisticated cow.
Yeah, it's such a long time ago. And then he's just lying there and I'm rubbing, massaging his feet, massaging his legs. And then he said, once, my mother took me to the market.
Y yo ahí masajeando las piernas, los pies y Prabhupada dijo, una vez mi madre me llevó al mercado.
When we went to the market, I saw some toys.
Y cuando llegamos al mercado yo vi algunos juguetes.
And I saw a gun.
Y vi una pistola.
And he said, when I saw it, he said, I had to have it.
Y cuando lo vi tenía que tenerlo.
So immediately I said, I want this gun.
Y inmediatamente dije, yo quiero esa pistola.
His mother sounds like she did more disciplining than the father in the family.
Parece que en la familia la madre tuvo, quería más disciplina que el padre.
So of course she said no, she didn't want to get him the gun.
Y ella por supuesto dijo que no quería comprar la pistola.
But Prabhupada insisted he wanted the gun.
Pero él insistió, quería la pistola.
So finally she said okay, she bought him the gun.
Al final, ¿cómo se dice? No, relenting. Anyway, ella le compró la pistola.
So, of course, he said, I took the gun in my hand and I was holding it. And then I raised my other hand and I didn't have a gun in my other hand. So then I told her I want another gun.
Yo tenía una pistola en la mano y cogí la otra mano y vi que ahí no había. Y le dije a ella, pues también quiero otra pistola para la otra mano.
But then she insisted, no, you have a gun, that's all, no more.
Pero ella dijo que no, ya tienes una, no más.
He said, so finally I laid down on the ground.
Y al final me puse en el suelo, me tiré al suelo,
And I began banging my hands on the ground.
así con las manos en el suelo,
And my head,
y mi cabeza,
he said, do you see this scar?
esta cicatriz,
It is from that time, he said.
de ese tiempo.
That was Prabhupada's determination. It was always there.
Esa determinación de Prabhupada siempre.
So she had no choice, so she bought him the other gun.
Él no tuvo otra elección, le compró la otra pistola.
He said, then I was happy.
Sentí feliz.
Massaging, and then he stopped, and then
Estuve masajeando y de repente paró.
he started again. And he said, when I was going to school, he said I wanted one pair of shoes.
Y dijo, cuando iba al colegio, yo quería un par de zapatos.
He said I had seen in the store these shoes, they were from England.
Y había visto en una tienda esos zapatos que habían venido desde Inglaterra.
He said they were very, very nice.
Eran muy bonitas.
He said, and I wanted them.
Y los quise.
He said, so I told my father.
Y lo dijo a mi padre.
He said, and he bought them for me.
Y me los compró.
They're very expensive.
Los zapatos caros.
Maybe 10 rupees, he said at the time, which was a lot of money.
Entonces eran unos 10 rupias, pero era mucho dinero en esos tiempos.
So they were very nice, he said, English shoes, and they were leather shoes.
Y eran zapatos muy bonitos de Inglaterra, llenos de cuero.
And he said, I used to wear those shoes to school every day.
Y me puse esos zapatos cada día.
So all this was going on, I'm always trying to imagine Prabhupada in all these situations. It was very difficult to imagine Prabhupada being this, young boy.
Yo escuchando eso, tratando de imaginarme cómo fue Prabhupada en esos tiempos, un joven.
So I was just thinking, like a young boy, and I said, when you walked to school, I said, did you used to look at your shoes as you were walking?
Y le pregunté, pues cuando ibas al colegio, ¿estabas mirando tus zapatos andando?
And he slapped his knee. He said, yes, yes. He said, I would walk along. He said, and I would watch my feet as they were going down.
Y estaba riéndose diciendo, sí, sí. No, andando, yo estaba mirando a mis pies como estaban así con los zapatos, dando pasos.
Just would become quiet and relaxed. So there was one story I wanted to tell. It's very funny and very nice. It's also well known. It's called 7-Up story.
Una de las historias que se conoce y muy divertida es la historia de 7-Up.
Because
todo el mundo sabe que es 7-Up, ¿no? La bebida.
7-Up. Because when you became a devotee, you never took anything outside of the temple. You never drank, not even a juice would you buy outside the temple.
Cuando nos hicimos devotos, pues nadie tomó nada que no, si no era dentro del templo, ni siquiera un zumo o alguna bebida fuera del templo.
I have it when devotees went out on Sankirtan, when they came back with a very big feast. The book distributors always came back with a nice prasadam when they got back, so they would wait for that.
Los que distribuían libros, pues cuando volvieron al templo, ahí hubo una fiesta para ellos.
So I was on a plane with Srila Prabhupada.
Estuvimos en un avión.
And it was the summer of 1973.
Verano del 73.
And Prabhupada was flying from India back to New York.
Y Prabhupada voló desde la India otra vez a Nueva York.
And it was a very big 747.
Una de esas grandes aviones, una 747.
Prabhupada was on the right side, sitting next to the window, as he always did.
Y Prabhupada estaba sentado a la derecha, al lado de la ventana.
And there were 3 seats, so I was next to Prabhupada and Shamasundar was next to me.
Había 3 asientos, Prabhupada en la ventana, yo al lado y luego Shamasundar.
Pradyumna was also there.
Y también estaba Pradyumna.
So as they always in the habit of doing on very long flights, was they just come with these trays of drinks.
Como en esos vuelos es habitual, se llevan esos carros con las bebidas.
So this time from behind, this flight attendant lady had this tray, and on it were just clear glasses with 7-Up and Coca-Cola.
Vino una de las azafatas desde atrás con algunos vasos así transparentes con Coca-Cola, 7-Up.
So when she came up and she stopped right in front of us,
Entonces paró a nuestro lado
and she said, "Do you want anything?"
y preguntando, ¿queréis algo?
So of course we would never take anything.
Pero nosotros nunca tomamos nada.
And I looked at Prabhupada, I said, Prabhupada looked at me, he said, "What is that?"
Entonces Prabhupada me preguntó, ¿eso qué es?
I said, "We're 7-Ups, Prabhupada."
Son 7-Ups.
I said, "Would you like one?"
¿Quieres uno?
Okay. So then she handed and gave Prabhupada the 7-Up.
Prabhupada pues cogió el 7-Up.
So immediately we all grabbed our 7-Up.
Nosotros también, inmediatamente uno para nosotros.
Because he was the guru, whatever he did was okay for us.
Él era el guru, cualquier cosa que él hizo pues era también.
So now the 4 of us are all sitting there with these little cups of 7-Up in front of us.
Estuvimos ahí los 4 sentados con un vasito de 7-Up delante.
So no one could do anything until Prabhupada picked his up.
Nadie podía hacer nada hasta que Prabhupada cogió su vaso.
Because he had to make a prasadam, right?
Tuvo que poner, o sea, volverlo prasadam, hacerlo de prasadam. Convertirlo.
Prabhupada picked it, had ice in it as well.
Había un poco de hielo dentro.
Prabhupada picked it up and put it to his mouth.
Prabhupada lo cogió el vaso a sus labios.
Yeah. Very refreshing.
Muy refrescante.
It really is just very nice.
Muy bueno.
So we all started drinking our 7-Up. So then again he took a longer sip and went, "This is very good," he said, "very refreshing."
Muy refrescante, muy bueno.
I always think it would have been a great 7-Up commercial. It was probably like perfect advertisement for it.
Okay. Hubiera sido una buena publicidad.
Because when he liked something, he really showed appreciation.
Porque cuando le gustaba algo, pues mostró, ¿no?, su apreciación.
So we drank our 7-Ups, and the lady came back and took the cups later on.
Tomamos nuestro 7-Up, luego vino la azafata recogiendo los vasos.
So about 2 hours go by,
2 horas más tarde,
and here she comes again with the big cart now.
y viene de nuevo, ahora con un carro más grande.
And now they have, she's saying, "What would you like to drink?"
Y pregunta que si quiere algo para beber.
So I looked at Prabhupada, I said, "Would you like anything to drink?"
Y miro a Prabhupada, ¿quiere algo para beber?
He said, "Yes, I'll have some 7 o'clock."
Sí, quiero un 7 o'clock, las 7 horas.
So I said, "We'll have 7-Up."
Queremos un 7-Up.
So now she gave us cans, full cans of 7-Up,
Y ahora nos da pues, una lata entera
and glasses with ice.
y vasos con hielo.
So of course we all had 7-Ups in front of us.
Otra vez tuvimos todos delante de nosotros un 7-Up.
So now they had those little things you pulled off then.
Mira, tienes que abrirlo así la lata.
So I put the can in front of Prabhupada,
Y yo pongo la lata delante de Prabhupada
and he picked it up.
y lo coge,
Because he was always curious, Prabhupada.
qué curioso.
And he started reading the ingredients.
Y estaba mirando los ingredientes.
Amen. Water,
Agua,
sugar,
azúcar,
citric acid,
ácido cítrico,
lemon.
limón.
Very nice.
Muy bien.
So I poured it in, and we drank our cans of 7-Up.
Nos bebimos las latas de 7-Up.
Prabhupada would always say, very refreshing.
Muy refrescante,
He
¿cierto?
said, this is very good. So that was 7-Up on the plane on the way to New York City.
Y esa es la historia del 7-Up en el avión, dirección Nueva York.
So now it was July of 1973. Weather is like here, very hot in New York City.
En el verano en Nueva York mucho calor.
And after everything went in, Prabhupada greeted the deities, gave a short talk, and then we went into his quarters.
Prabhupada saludó a los deidades y fuimos a la habitación.
And one brahmachari said to me, does Prabhupada need anything? Do you need anything for Prabhupada in his room?
Y un brahmachari me pregunta, ¿necesitáis algo para Prabhupada?
I was never had much of an imagination. Prabhupada never needed anything. I could never think of what he needed.
Yo nunca tuve mucha imaginación porque Prabhupada nunca necesitaba nada.
Then I thought, I said, some 7-Up.
Y yo pensaba en ese momento, bueno, algunos 7-Up.
He looked at me, he said, huh? I said, you can get a 6-pack of 7-Up.
Y dije, compra así uno de esos packs con 6, ¿no? De 7-Up.
I told him he had had a 7-Up on the plane, and
Y
he
le
liked it.
expliqué que Prabhupada tomó eso en el avión.
I said, okay.
Bueno,
So we had the 7-Up there, so several days went by and I could never bring Prabhupada the 7-Up. I was afraid to bring it into him because he never asked for one.
ahí estaba el 7-Up durante unos cuantos días porque yo nunca lo llevé dentro a Prabhupada, porque tampoco él nunca pidió algo así.
So one hot, humid evening, he was speaking with the temple president of one temple.
Una noche muy calurosa estaba él hablando con un presidente de un templo.
And I was in the kitchen, little kitchen.
Estuve en una cocina que era muy pequeña.
And this devotee, he left Prabhupada's room and he came up to me.
Y ese devoto pues salió de la habitación de Prabhupada y me vino
And he said, Prabhupada's out of water, he wants some water.
y me dice que Prabhupada ya no tiene más agua, quiere algo de agua.
And he's waiting for me to give him the cup, he has the cup. And I said, I'll take care of it.
Y el devoto estoy esperando, tiene el vaso vacío. Y yo le dije, pues ya voy yo.
And he said, no, he said, I'll bring it back with me.
Y dijo, no, yo lo llevo a él.
Then I said, no, I said, I'll do it.
Y yo dije, no, yo ya me ocupo yo.
So I thought, of course, this was the perfect time. I'll try bringing him the 7-Up.
Y pensé, ese era el momento perfecto para darse un 7-Up.
So the devotee went back in the Prabhupada's room, closed the door, and they were having a big discussion.
Y el devoto se volvió a la habitación de Prabhupada, cerrando la puerta y hablando con él.
So I had Prabhupada's silver goblet, and I put some ice cubes in it, put the 7-Up in there.
Tuve ahí el vaso de plata de Prabhupada, puse algunos hielos, trozos de hielo y el 7-Up.
And I headed towards Prabhupada's room.
Y fui a la habitación de Prabhupada.
Now you all know, when the spiritual master asks for water, Prabhupada would use that example, you don't bring him milk, you bring him water.
Entonces se conoce ese ejemplo, cuando el maestro espiritual pide agua, se le lleva agua, no se le lleva a leche.
So you have to follow exactly what he says.
Hay que hacer exactamente lo que dice.
So I was a little concerned that he would not be very happy with my offering.
Pero yo tenía un poco de temor que tal vez no le gustaba esa ofrenda.
So I walked to the door and I opened it up to go in and bring him the 7-Up.
Fue la puerta abriéndola para entrar con el 7-Up.
And again, my godbrother's standing at the door and he's trying to take the cup from me.
Y está el hermano espiritual en la puerta tratando de coger el vaso de mí.
And my nature is to be very submissive. It is, really.
Mi naturaleza es ser muy sumiso.
But I was determined that I was going to deliver this drink the Prabhupada.
pero tenía en ese momento la determinación de llevar esa bebida a Prabhupada.
So I just said, no, it's my service. I said, I'm his servant. So I'm going to bring it to him.
Le dije, pues no, eso es mi servicio, yo soy el serviente, voy a llevarle el vaso.
So he kind of begrudgingly let me into Prabhupada's room.
Un poco molesto me dejó entrar.
Prabhupada was sitting on the floor on a cushion behind his little small desk.
Estaba sentado encima de un cojín detrás de su mesa.
So I put the goblet right in front of him.
Y le puse el vaso delante de él.
And he grabbed it and he looked, he could see it was, saw the ice cubes in there. So
Lo
he
cogió
took
y lo estaba mirando porque se dio cuenta que ahí había cubitos de hielo.
and he took it and just took a sip.
Y un sorbito.
And he went. I'm not exaggerating. He would do every time.
No es una exageración.
He says this is very good. So then he stood up
Y se levantó
and he just started walking back and forth. And he was
caminando, ida y vuelta y tomándose el celular.
and this devotee's wondering what's going on. This is just so unusual.
Pensando, ¿qué está pasando?
So he drank the whole glass.
Y se bebió todo el vaso.
And I just sat on the floor and waited.
Y lo sentaron en el suelo esperando.
And he handed it to me.
Me dio el vaso.
I said, would you like some more?
Y le pregunté, ¿quieres un poco más?
He said, no, that's good.
Suficiente.